thought was, you're not old. That was the thought, you're not old. And I'll tell you, and I have not really shared anything personal about my life yet, and I'll get to that as soon as I get a little bit more comfortable with it. But there came a time where was 50 years old, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, I'm 50, and it seemed like my life just kind of fell apart. Seemed like things just fell to pieces. Everything that could happen bad happened bad. Um, and I was like, man, I said, I'm 50 and I'm looking towards or looking forward to retirement. And why did everything just seem to fall apart? I said, this is terrible timing. And I remember talking to God and I said, God, I just, I'm too old for this. There's no way I can make it. I'm 50. I'm supposed to be looking to, that life at the beach, retirement, enjoying my life. And now it seems like I have to start over from ground zero. And I remember God told me, he said, who told you that? And I said, who told me what, God? He said, who told you you were old? And I just kind of paused. And he said, so when are you going to die? And I said, well, I don't know. He said, well, how do you know if you're old? He said, all I ask you to do is to live. He said, let me worry about the rest, right? And that kind of brings up a thought I heard from a young lady, Priscilla Shira. She said this. She said, if you're 40 and you're going to die at the age of 43, then you're old. If you're 40 and you're going to die at the age of 100, then you're young, right? And so I started to think about that, and I was like, well, I guess you're right. I said, I guess you're right, God. Well, not guess you're right, but I think you're really, really right. Because again, as I began to think about that, I realized that 50 is not old. 50 is not old at all. I mean, for me, 50 was the open door for a new life, right? I have more peace now than I had, in my earlier years. I know a little bit more than I knew back then. I make smarter choices now than I did back then, right? Me and one of my friends were talking a couple weeks ago, and we were just talking about age. He's a little bit older than me, and we're just talking about age again. And the subject came up again, and he kind of mimicked the same thing that I said. Oh yeah, I'm 60 plus, and man, he said, I don't know. I'm still trying to get things together. And I'm just kind of running out of time. And I said, who told you that? Right? Like I've been knowing this all my life. I just heard it from God a few days before, right? And we just began to have a conversation. And I told him, I said, look, 50 and earlier, you learned how to live. 50 and greater, you should know how to live, right? You're living. Let me say that again. 50 and earlier, right? 49, 48, 30s, 20, you were learning how to live. Now that you're 50 and you're getting a little bit older, 51, 52, 60, 70, you know how to live, right? So I think it's time that we change our mentality, because again, somebody taught us that when you turn 50, you're old. And many of us, if we were honest with one another, we know within ourselves, once we turn 50, or even if we're gonna turn 50 in a few years, we start thinking about dying, not living. And the truth of the matter is that you should start thinking about living, not dying. Okay? If you are going to live to 100 years old and you're 50, guess what? You got 50 more years. Now's not a time to plan for death. Now's a time to plan for life. You're not old. You're just getting started. And again, I'll reiterate when I 50 and beyond, right? Younger than 50, I was learning how to live. I was making poor decisions. I was saying things I shouldn't have been saying. I was reading things I shouldn't have been reading. I was dating people I shouldn't have been dating. I was making poor financial decisions. Now that I learned those lessons and I'm beyond 50, guess what? Now I'm wise to make the right decisions, right? And when you're 40, 30, 20 years old, somebody say something about you all been out of shape, you don't feel good for 3 weeks, you don't talk to nobody, you sad, you're depressed, you sitting in the house with all the lights off. Now I'm 50 and somebody say something to me, I'll say, hey, look. You don't like it, you know where to go. I don't care. You know what I'm saying? I don't care. I don't care what you think about me. You don't know me. You know what I'm saying? I'm 50 plus. I don't care what you think. If I post something on social media and you don't like it, so what? I don't care. You know what I'm saying? And so as you turn 50 and beyond, guess what? You start to understand you. And these last 3 years, that's what I've been doing. I've been searching for me. You know what I'm saying? And I realized something that I didn't really know myself. I was just going through the motions, making mistakes here and making mistakes there and trying to figure out this and trying to figure out that and not really knowing what I really want to eat or not really knowing, what I like, what are my favorite things to do. Why? Because I started working at a very early age, I think age of 16, went to the military at the age of 18, and you get into this cycle. You don't get a chance to think about you. You don't get you start a family, have kids, you don't get a chance to think about you. You don't know you. And then when you get that space of time where everything just pauses and you realize that the only person in the room is you, then you realize, oh my goodness, who is this person? And so that's what I did the last 2, 3 years. I took time to figure out who I was. It's a very crazy thing when you don't even realize what your favorite food is. It's crazy when you don't realize what your favorite movie is. It's crazy when you don't realize what your favorite music is. Because for so long you accommodated everybody else. You don't really like rock and roll, but guess what? Everybody else do, so you can just kind of bob your head to it. Hey, rock and roll, rock and roll, rock and roll. Right? And when I got an opportunity to figure out who I was, I realized I really like me. I really like me. You know what I'm saying? And God put some special gifts inside of me that I could not figure out because I was so busy just doing a normal routine. You wake up in the morning, you go to work, you come home from work, you watch TV, you eat dinner, you go to bed. And that cycle continued on for like 20, 30 years. And now I have an opportunity to think. I have an opportunity to ask myself some questions that I have not asked myself before. I got an opportunity to explore and see things that I want to see. And guess what? I love it. I love it. So I'm just wanting to tell you and to explain to you that you're not old. You're just getting started. Someone once said that age is what you think about yourself. You're only old when you start to think that you're old. Okay? If you think that you're young, guess what? You're gonna act young and you're gonna feel young. Okay? And so I heard something today and it was so powerful. It's actually from Okinawa. I was stationed at Okinawa when I was in the military, and it was actually from Okinawa. It says this. It says at 70 years old, you are a child. At 80 years old, you are a young person. If at the age of 90, someone from heaven invites you over, tell them to come back when you're 100. When I heard that, I was like, what? You're young at the age of 70? You're a child? At the age of 80, you're a young person? And if somebody from heaven invites you over at the age of 90, tell them to come back when you're 100. Wow, that did something to my mentality. And that came from Okinawa. And in that city that this actually came from, those folks lived to 100+ years old. 100+ years old because of that mentality. That what I just read you actually comes out of a statue in that city. And it's from Okinawa, Japan. Those folks live to 100+ years old. Okay. You know why they live to 100+ years old? Their diet, they still work, right? And their mentality. They don't eat a lot of red meat. They eat very little red meat. Most of the food that they eat is vegetarian, vegetables, and things of that sort, rice and things of that sort, right? So they got good eating habits, okay? They still work. You know, you're 80, 90 years old, and you're still out in the garden working, painting your house, fixing your floors. Okay. When I worked in Okinawa, we had some folks there that worked with us. We called them locals, but they were actually Okinawans. We called them locals. And so there was a handful of us military Americans, and then there was about 20 or so locals. And at the time, we were actually delivering government furniture to the government houses to the government people when they moved in. And so, me and, maybe a couple military folks, it'd take about two or three of us to lift up a couch and take it into the house. And you see a Japanese guy, he put a whole couch on his back and he's walking up the stairs like it's nobody business. I said, good Lord, right? And so, we're carrying, queen size mattresses and we're struggling and we're sweating and we're just having a time, me and my military partners. We're having a time. Oh, this is terrible. And then you see the Japanese guy grab a mattress and, and so one time I asked one of the Okinawas, I said, hey, how old are you? He said, how old do you think I am? I said, well, I would say, I think you're about 35. And he laughed. And the other folks laughed. As a matter of fact, he took me into their break room. They were eating lunch and stuff like that. And so he told them what I said in his language, and they all laughed at me. They all laughed at me. And at the time I was about 20, 21, 22. And they laughed and laughed. And I said, well, did I say something funny? Are you older than 36? And they said, he said, no. He said, I'm 65. I said, 65? I said, you got to be kidding me. Right? And so he was 65 years old, grabbing whole couches, taking them into the house, grabbing mattresses. And here you have two 20-year-olds struggling for dear life. And we come out there, that one house, delivering a couch and a mattress, and we are wet with sweat. And he gets in his truck and he moves on like nobody's business. Okay. The moral of the story is you're only as old as you think you are. Right. And people should have to guess how old you are because the way you move, the way you think, and the way you eat. Okay. So if you are 40, 50 and beyond, you're not old. You're just getting started. Okay. If you think young, you act young. If you think young, you'll grow young. If you think young, you'll look young. Okay. So you are not old. You're just getting started. All right. So that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for joining me. And hey, have a good life.